number one Penn State football recruiting and talk show on the internet, radio, anywhere. It's BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Ryan Snyder, Sean Fitz. We're here to talk about Penn State's latest recruiting news. A big, full stacked show coming up today. Here's what we got coming up. We have the Elite 11. We're going to get into some of the conversations and some of the performances we touched on the live show on Tuesday. We're going to revisit some of those conversations. Ryan is here, who was at Under Armour in Baltimore, so we're going to get to his view of all of that for the first time this week. There was an On 300 update for the class of 2026. Still too soon, but good information to have. We have a running back deep dive and an official visit set for Penn State for one of the team's top prospects. But that's not all we're talking about today. We're talking about what you want to know as well. So drop your thoughts in the chat, which is spicy today. We started at 10:02, and Dawn, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're 15 minutes late, and you should probably quit. We also have Mech Engineer, who's got a question we'll get to later on in the show today. But gentlemen, how you doing today? How's the week going for you, Ryan?
Wonderful. Going to try and stop out at Big 33 practice later today. Tyseer Denmark, Kenny Wosley are out there. Going to go check out those guys, say hello. Had a fun time at the Phillies game last night. It's Memorial Day weekend. Yeah, man, can't complain. This is it. This is our last weekend before everything really takes off.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about this week. Fitz, what are you thinking about as we get the show started here today?
Thinking about a little bit of everything. I said in the chat, my recycling got out, so longtime listeners of the show can rest easy now. That bit is continuing, but now we're just we got this Memorial Day weekend, holiday weekend, then we get back into official visits, which are the big thing, and then camp season, of course, comes with that. So there's going to be plenty to talk about in the next couple of weeks.
And one of the biggest things to talk about here to start the show is our show sponsor who makes a lot of this possible, and that is My Perfect Franchise. If you want to take the next step in your career, which is to work for yourself, if you have corporate experience, or maybe you're an expert in a certain field, Andy Ludicky is a franchise consultant who has placed people in businesses to manage and has helped them define the next step of their future. Call him at 404-973-9901. Whether it's things are booming and the economy is great, or things are on the downturn, or a certain sector is fading behind, there's always something moving. There's always an opportunity, and he knows how to get you in the right business so you can be successful and use your years of unique expertise to their fullest potential to make you money and not somebody else. Consider a franchise ownership on hands-off or day-to-day management level. Whatever you want, his services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. Check out the Blue White Illustrated message board or email Andy at myperfectfranchise.net to get started today. Okay, so let's get started with the show and some of the things that we have coming up this week. Ryan, from the news and notes section of what's happening for the Nittany Lions, there is another official visitor added to the list for this summer at wide receiver. So take us through what you found out this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
Well, this was one that I think Sean and I both kind of teased for a little while. We expected Quincy Porter to take an official visit, and he made it official, or put it out publicly, I guess. What was it, the other night? But look, he's the top receiver in the region. 6'3", 190 out of Bergen Catholic. He's got all the top honors that you would want, all the top schools after him. Penn State's going to get him that first weekend, get an opportunity to set the floor,
the bar.
I guess. Set the bar. Yeah, yes. Set the bar.
Cliche that one.
But it's not going to be easy. I mean, I think for a long time I've thought Ohio State, Michigan's absolutely in there. Oklahoma's a little bit of a surprise. I thought it'd be Texas A&M that maybe gets his fourth official visit, but he did go to A&M not that long ago as well. So look, Penn State's in it, and this is a guy who really doesn't communicate a lot, even with not just reporters, but also recruiters. Just kind of keeps to himself. So that, in some degree, is a positive. I'm not trying to be too negative, just because I think we've been hitting on Ohio State and Michigan a long time with him. And, just the feedback I've got is that he's kind of always kept to himself. So those opportunities sometimes end up being those guys who kind of surprise you, I guess you would say, and maybe make a decision that not many are expected. But again, Ohio State's pretty good at getting wide receivers. They're pretty aggressive from NIL perspective, all that kind of stuff. And that would lead me to kind of lean towards the Buckeyes at this point.
So that brings up what Mech Engineer wanted to know. He said, good morning, fellas. Can you limit the discussion to visitors who you think have a realistic chance for landing at Penn State? Fitz, you've been saying this whole time, hey, we think he's their top guy. I don't know if he's going to go to the school, but how important is this official visit? And we always talk about setting the bar high. I guess, how do you pull out all the stops for a guy if you want to change the narrative about your school and get one of these players to commit and then develop him at your school?
Well, he's not committed yet. I mean, he's not committed anywhere yet. So you have a chance. It might not be the biggest chance, but you do have a chance to sign Quincy Porter. I'm baffled by the defeatism of this fan base at times, especially this cycle, with everything basically. But here's a guy that's your top target. You're getting him on campus. Your pitch to him is to come in and be the guy almost right away. And you look at his highlights and his film, he's really good. I mean, he is as good as a regional receiver as we've seen in the last couple of cycles. And he's up there with some good ones too. Yeah, I mean, this is one that you've got to see what kind of chops you've got, because you're working uphill, you're pushing that stone uphill, and it's probably not going to go in your favor, but it doesn't mean you're out of it. I mean, you're one of 4 official visits. That doesn't give you a 25% chance, but you're one of 4 that have a shot to put this or to make this impression on him. Now, with Porter, he came to Penn State in the spring. Before that, we got vibes that he just wasn't very interested, but they have a good relationship there. They've got, they haven't gone out and signed anybody from Bergen Catholic in a long time, but they have a good constant relationship there. Now, are they going to sign him? Probably not, but come on now, guys. This is why we follow. Like, there have been upsets.
Optimism season.
I'm an optimistic person for the most part, but I mean, it's just, it's tough to read the same thing over and over again. It's just like, it's like, okay, the golf tournament's this weekend and Scotty Scheffler's probably the favorite. I haven't looked at the odds, but it's like saying, hey, I'm going to take the field against Scotty Scheffler and then pound your chest when he finishes second. Like, that's like that to me is how we're doing this whole thing right now. And I mean, this guy is worth the trouble. Like, and it's not a trouble recruitment. That's probably the wrong word for
the
it,
fight. He's worth the fight.
Effort. He's worth the fight. And you're going to see that when he gets on campus next weekend. Will it go Penn State's way? I don't know. Probably not. But at the same time, they're one of 4 here.
This is, my wife uses this line all the time. I'm not a defeatist, but a realist. I have a philosophical disagreement with that. That is neither here nor there. But I don't, it's not useful to just automatically assume the negative.
To say don't talk about it because I don't think he's coming here is disingenuous. It's not like, that's not how we follow recruiting.
Ryan, what do you think of Porter in terms of his talent and what you've seen from him? What do you think he can be for the Nittany Lions?
Sean already brought it up. I mean, can't think of too many guys in the region who have brought what he brings athletically and has put on tape that have matched up in the last couple of years. So, I mean, this is absolutely a top wide receiver that, could come in and I don't know about play immediately, but not too far off probably. He's got everything you want there. So time will tell. The one thing I will say is I feel like Lyric Samuel is a stud, and they do have, he's got a lot of the same measurables and different things like that. Not quite as nationally recruited, but I do feel like Penn State did get one of those taller, lengthier guys that can help them spread the field a little bit as well. So, well, do they want more? Absolutely. They'll take Quincy Porter. Corey Sims is kind of similar as well. There's a few others.
Yeah.
Time will tell, but I just, Ohio State has always just felt like the team to me with Porter. But again, I will stress, like, this is a guy who is kind of quiet. So we've seen those quiet recruitments in the past surprise us, whether it's to Penn State's favor or elsewhere.
It's interesting just bringing up the conversation about this. And I went through and I looked at some of the numbers and I looked at some of the profiles of these players. I said early on, after talking to Marques Hagans and kind of getting a vibe for what he did at Virginia, guy likes bigger receivers, but you recruit anybody who's good, right? Lex Cyrus is on the official visit list. They desperately want him. He's 5'11". He's the only player under 6 feet that is taking an official visit to Penn State as far as who's a wide receiver recruit and prospect. So interesting. You mentioned Lyric Samuel. We got to see him up close at the Elite 11. We'll talk a little bit about that later. A guy who's almost 6'4". Here's another guy who's 6'3" and really big. Shaping up that it could be Penn State's tallest wide receiver class, whether that means anything or not. I just think it's been an interesting trend to watch this first full year under Marques Hagans and what he's been prioritizing as the wide receivers coach, because we love to make snap judgments, as human beings, and Marques Hagans is not good, according to a lot of people so far, but we haven't really seen him go through a full recruiting class, and I think this is part of that conversation, getting a guy who's a top receiver recruit in the nation to actually take that official visit. I remember, was it Who's the North Carolina wide receiver that went to Ohio State that was one of their top receivers a couple years ago, and they didn't even get him in for a visit? Fitz, do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, he's
Rogers
in NC State now.
Yeah,
Noah Rogers.
Noah Rogers. Thank you. I was going to say Charles Rogers, but that was very wrong. Is that what we got on Quincy Porter? Any other last thoughts or comments you want to add here to the conversation?
They got a lot of receivers coming in. I mean,
and that's a heck of a stat. Like, I just went and double checked. Like, the shortest receiver they got coming in is 6 foot, besides like Cyrus. I'm actually stunned by that.
They wanted Romero Eason, who was
right.
They committed to USC, so it was him and Lex are always kind of those slot guys they really prioritize. But I mean, look,
Desi Jones committed to Ohio State, which he was the third of that group. Like, that was surprising.
So they got a ton of guys coming in. I mean, this is without a doubt. You just look at the official visit list that we have, over on BWI. Like, it's without a doubt the deepest position that they're recruiting right now. They are casting a wide net, and there's a lot of guys out there. Matthew Otten, excuse me. I mean, a bunch of others that we're going to talk about Exeter here in a little bit, but they're going to get some quality guys, whether it's Porter or elsewhere. I'm not too concerned.
So the next thing we have to talk about today, which came out, is the On 300 update for 2026. Fitz, I'm going to beat you to the punch. It's too early to take a lot of stock in these rankings, but they are informative of maybe some of the latest movements and information in recruiting from testing numbers or things like that. So, Ryan, I know you went through the On 300 and pointed out some of these things. If you're watching here on the YouTube channel, there are 10 prospects from Pennsylvania in the On 300, and here are some of the guys that are a part of the top 100. So what stands out to you about the On 300 update, and do you want to go into detail about any of that stuff that we just had up there?
Man, I got a sore throat this morning. There wasn't a lot of change in this update. I think the main thing, like, we're going to see, I think, a lot more movement after camp season. Once we get to June, July, that's when I think you'll see a lot more, especially 2026 movement. Mickens, I don't think, moved at all. I don't think Kevin Brown moved at all either. I believe they both are at the same exact spots they were previously. Tyler Merrill bumped down a little bit, maybe like 20 plus spots, and that was half of that is because guys just moving up above him. The big most notable thing was Joey O'Brien, the safety prospect out of LaSalle, joining the On 300. That was a guy that I think Sean and I have hit on quite a few times. It felt like a 4-star, someone we were kind of overlooking a little bit. He's been great at the OT7 events. And a guy that, if he's able to kind of show what he's been showing at 7-on-7 and translate that to the fall, he's a guy who could keep moving up. And we have him at 203 right now, I believe. And there's a lot of people really high on Joey O'Brien. So that kind of grabbed my attention. Wadiq Collier, Sean, did you see him recently? Is he going to be we have him as like a what was that?
We have him as a receiver, and he's a defensive end. I think that's it.
I saw you mention him somewhere recently.
Yeah, he just got it but not too long ago. Okay. He's a really long, rangy guy that want to have in camp, obviously, to figure out what he is. But yeah, I think he's the rare receiver to defensive end prospect.
But he moved up big too. He was 261 originally, up to 140 now. David Davis is a guy I've hit on a lot. I still kind of think we're sleeping on him a little bit in these rankings. He's down at 206. But Harris, I keep going back to that Harrisburg team, man. Kevin Brown, Elias Koch, Deontay Sheffy, and of course Messiah Mickens. They're all on the same team now, and they're all in the On 300. So excited to go see them this year. Actually, I did get a look at them
yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. That's what. Okay.
There you go.
I get it now. Okay.
Ryan, we were on Tuesday, and somebody asked about the Harrisburg showcase. It's not on our rundown, but that is something we probably should circle back around to.
Yeah, great event.
It was supposed to be on the rundown. It was definitely supposed to be on the rundown. That's my bad.
Really, I already knew what Kevin Brown was. He's a freak. I mean, Kevin Brown, in my opinion, Emmanuel Iheanacho, let me clarify. Emmanuel Iheanacho really stood out this past week at Under Armour. But like Kevin Brown, if that kid ends up being the top offensive lineman in the country when it's all said and done, I would not be surprised. He is an absolute freak. What really kind of stood out to me actually was a little more Tyler Merrill. He's added size and he moved better than I thought that he would at that event. That kind of stood out to me a good bit. Outside of that,
distributed size. He's always been absolutely massive, but yeah.
But he's like 330 now. Continues to add size, but looks good. I mean, moved really well in a couple of the drills, I thought. Look, it's Messiah Mickens. We already know what Messiah is. It was a 7-on-7 event, right? So you're not going to get a whole lot of running back information out of that. Messiah, I think he didn't even do all the drills, I don't believe. But it was a good event. It was mainly for, I would say, FCS, some smaller schools. Penn State did show up. They had a lot of guys there, too. It was Ty Howe. Marques Hagans, Phil Troutwine, and Tom Allen were all there, which, shows kind of how important Lex Cyrus is and some other guys. Lex also did only some of the events, but man, there's a couple clips I put out there. His speed and his agility, and the progress he's made as far as being a track guy who played football. Well, yeah, he's a legit football player now, and deserves to be ranked kind of where he is. He's really put it together. He needs to work on his hands still, and he knows that. But everything else is there for Lex Cyrus to be a phenomenal player.
What do you think of the 2026? Because the spring fling in Harrisburg, a lot of this, your focus and a lot of what we saw were those offensive linemen. What does the region look like? What does Pennsylvania look like in 2026? Because I know we talked about it felt like a strong region this year in 2025, and some of the top players that have emerged from the state. Are they going to be following that up as far as what you can tell from an early perspective in terms of players that have a legitimate chance to be top 100 players, top 300 players in Pennsylvania that Penn State has a strong chance with?
I think we'll have a better feel for that after camps, because there's quite a few Pennsylvania guys on this on 300 who Penn State hasn't really pursued a whole lot yet. And I expect those guys to come to camp. And once we get some testing numbers, I think we'll be able to get a better feel for, whether they deserve to be kind of ranked where they are right now. I think 10 is about right, but there's a couple, like I could see it dropping a little bit. And, then there will also be some guys right now that, we're not talking about, some 3-star guys who maybe pop up. So it's a solid year. The top is great. I think the top is among one of the better years. But there's some of those guys in maybe the back half that have a few questions about still, that whether they really are, 4-star prospects long-term.
Fitz, any thoughts on the on 300 update?
Not really. I think it's still very early, and we're still filtering things. Like when the first updates came out, I sent Joey O'Brien to Charles Power and said, "Hey, this guy's better than half the Pennsylvania kids that are in there." So that's kind of where we're at with filtering that whole thing. And you still see a lot of 3-stars in the on 300 as those rankings mature. You're going to see more of those 4-stars, and it's going to work itself out.
I just saw this in the chat. This is Eggman says, "I can't wait till Messiah arrives." And I don't know if this is a slow clap or if this is a face palm, but it is certainly something here in the chat from Eggman talking about Messiah Mickens. Let's move on, and actually, perfect segue to talk about the running backs. Penn State's running backs in the class of 2025. You can check out the article over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. I'm going to say up front right now, there's some great information about it that Fitz is not going to be getting into today. So to get that stuff, sign up right now. Use the code PSU1. You get 2 months of recruiting and football and film breakdown, wrestling, basketball, everything. But if you're a recruiting fanatic, it's the place you have to be. Code PSU1 for 2 months. You get it for just $1 to try it out because you support us here on the YouTube channel, because you listen to the podcast. We love you. We appreciate you. Want to give you a little something extra to really incentivize you to take the deep dive and join us over at the site. Okay, so class of 2025 deep dive. Fitz, where do you want to go with this particular group, which you can see here on the YouTube channel? Here are the commits in the class. What did you learn kind of getting into this group?
Very quickly, there's 3 commits, but Penn State's going to keep recruiting the position until December. I think they end up with 3 running backs. I'm not sure it's going to be the 3 guys that are committed right now. I think that's an interesting dynamic. Alvin Henderson was at Auburn last weekend. Keandre Barker has moved back to Arkansas. He's not going to play at Miami Central. He's back at BB. So that'll cause an interesting dynamic there. He just got an offer from the Razorbacks and probably going to visit them. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. By the way, Tyke Hayes, that's a guy we're sleeping on. I think he's a really good player. And I did a deep dive a couple of weeks ago looking closer at him as an athlete, as a winner. Aliquippa, you don't underestimate Aliquippa kids. There's a reason for that, and I think he's done a good job. He's carried the football a lot, and his numbers are great, but he's carried the football a lot in the last couple of years. But he's got some pop to him, so I'm excited to see him. Hopefully, he's one of those guys at camps this summer.
Is he a guy where if he played at IMG, he would have a higher ranking? Because I see some similarities in terms of being a really good running back, maybe not the fastest guy in the world, but he doesn't have that profile that a guy like Katron Allen did coming out. Do either of you see any kind of correlations between those two players as somebody who maybe we're sleeping on, as you mentioned, Fitz, because he's a really good football player?
I would give him the Katron comparison. I don't know about the IMG question. I'm sorry. It's such a big gap between Pennsylvania public school and smaller public school, and going to IMG. But if he had that profile, obviously he's going to get more looks. But I don't know. I think they're very similar players, similar athletes. It's tough to say because I've seen Katron for 3 years. He's obviously gotten bigger, and he's a special kind of tough runner. We'll see if Hayes is that. Like, you don't know about most high school running backs being that way until they get to college. We thought some other guys would pan out and be that type of runner, but I think it's a little bit early to say that with Hayes.
Also, real quick, I would say Aliquip is very respected, I think, by like people who do rankings and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So I wouldn't change that, or I don't think that would change a whole lot. With Tyke, I think like getting testing numbers on Tyke and things like that are kind of why he's like a high 3-star, but maybe not a little bit higher, just because there's just the film looks good. You know who he's going against and all that good stuff. But, there's some other things there that we don't quite have the full picture for.
Is there incentive to do that if he's already committed? And I know Penn State probably wants him to come to camp. So are there because there's also not a whole lot of testing data that I was able to find specifically on a guy like Quincy Porter. So if you've got all of these if you got the profile of a guy who's already committed or a high level prospect, is there an incentive to actually put those numbers out there in the world, Ryan, this summer?
Everyone's different. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he comes out and works. I mean, a bunch of their commits usually come to the whiteout camp, but it's a very gray answer. Guys have vacations, guys have other things going on.
Right.
I don't want to be like, oh, he doesn't come to camp because he doesn't want to put numbers out. Who knows? He may have something going on that just it didn't work timing wise. So look, Penn State knows what they have in him. He's already proven a lot on film. I'm not too worried about that.
The last question I have on this topic goes back to Keandre Barker. And I want to tie this into a couple different players, T.A. Cunningham, Beckham Kritza, guys who have moved schools and have had very disrupted high school careers where there's not a lot of film on them from their junior years or from at certain points in their career because of some of the movement they've done, and also injuries a part of this as well for kind of the full context of this picture. Fitz, is Penn State getting in like a market inefficiency here with some of these players where they're not highly ranked players because we don't have a lot of data on them, but Penn State feels like they are good players, good prospects to bet on in this class or in previous classes?
Yeah, I think we've got examples of that in the last couple of cycles. So I don't think that's a situation where it would be a new thing. Now, I would say I saw it more in previous classes. Like, I think there's some good players in the classes, but I think the examples of guys that are going to jump are probably a little bit more few and far between in this one. So I don't know, man. It's there's a lot of testing to do. Penn State feels pretty good about the guys they've taken, but there's still guys in this class they want to get more information on. And Hayes is not really fit in that category, but there's definitely some guys in this class they want to get another look at before they get it across the line. So yes, I would say so.
It's a lot easier to take these guys now in today's transfer portal world, though. It's a lot easier to take chances on guys who they look great as freshmen. Then we kind of, T.A. Cunningham, I think, is the perfect example of that, where this is a guy who comes out, is a 5-star player right off the bat, or maybe not a 5-star at the time, but people were talking about him like that as a freshman. Yeah, things didn't go well in the back half of his career, but physically there's so much there. It's kind of like the Zahir Mathis conversation we were having on the board the other day, Sean. We're everything's there. There's a couple things that are missing, but that's absolutely a guy that you still want to take your chance on because you believe in your coaching and you believe in your development, and you've proven it obviously over so many years. So TA, I look at a little differently than Kritza and Barker, but they all kind of are similar in some ways too.
Right.
Let's get on to this past weekend where I think we got some of that information, we got some of that data, and that is the camps that came to the region last Sunday, the Under Armour Regional. We haven't had a chance to talk about it here on the live show. Of course, we've broken down all of these things over BlueWhiteIllustrated.com over the last several days, but this is our first conversation because Ryan was at the regional in Baltimore while Fitz and I were here in State College. So Ryan, take us through what you thought was interesting, some players that stood out on Sunday, and, kind of dealer's choice, wherever you'd like to start with the players you talked to and some of the things you observed. What stood out to you most?
Yeah, there was 5 players there who, have official visits set to Penn State. And, for the most part, the majority of them, we do believe Penn State, is a very serious contender with. I would definitely start with the McDonogh guys, Jeff Exner, wide receiver, and Brandon Finney, cornerback. Brandon Finney right now, On3 has him ranked pretty good. And I still might think it might be slightly low. I mean, he's physically, like just the picture doesn't really kind of do it justice, but he is a guy who, he looks like he's been in a college weight room for a year or two now. Has good size, good length. Everything is right there for him to come in. And if he was able to, handle it from a technical perspective and learn the playbook and all that good stuff, he could contribute right away. And I don't think that's a surprise now when you have Oregon in the mix and Georgia in the mix and some of these other prominent schools. I mean, this is a guy who I could see continue moving up in the rankings. I think he had the longest broad jump the other day, almost 11 feet or something like that, which, that's an insane explosion number there. That's rare. Top 2 percentile or something like that. So Brandon Finney really kind of caught my eye. And then Exner as well. Exner 6'1". Our last number on him was 6'1", 210. I think he's closer. He's not 220, but 215.
Talk about a guy who looks like he's been in that college weight room for a while now. He's a really well put together receiver.
And he is. And so he's bigger than most. So here's what I watched from one-on-ones. First off, his explosion numbers are great. Another guy had a 10-foot broad. What was his vertical, Sean? 30 plus. I mean, the explosion is there, especially for a guy his size. That stands out. Now, there was other times too where, he'll beat him off the line, but maybe his overall 40 speed, which I think was a mid 4.6 or so, that wasn't quite, that allowed corners to catch with him sometimes. Yeah. And he needs to, he and his coach were telling me the other day, he's going to probably drop a little bit of weight. Like I said, I probably get down 205 or so. I think he needs to drop 10 pounds or so, work on that overall speed. But man, from an explosion perspective, I didn't realize how explosive Jeff Exner is. And that's really kind of one of the big takeaways that I took from watching him work out. I think he's absolutely a priority for Penn State. I've seen some fans kind of say oh, is he too big, not fast enough, all that stuff. All of his testing numbers are better than what I expected watching. Put it that way. So I think he's a priority. Finney's absolutely a priority, not just because they're McDonogh guys, but because I think they're both guys who could honestly continue to move up in the rankings as well. Go ahead, G. Frank.
No, I was just going to say, Fitz, why are all of these McDonogh guys such high floor prospects? You talk about guys we've seen in the past where they all seem like they're really well developed. They all seem like they're positionally good football players. Is this something that Penn State can bank on in this class, knowing that Quincy Porter, you're aiming high, you want to get a guy who's super talented and, top 5 in the country, but you always have this, it feels like you always have this McDonogh angle where if you need to get a guy in a class who you feel like is going to be a solid football player, they're there for you. If it all works out, if it all makes sense.
So if you look at a lot of the schools, especially in the DMV where they have a lot of the privates, the bust rate for McDonogh kids shockingly low compared to, some of the programs that Penn State regularly farms. And then you throw in a place like St. Francis, which has a ton of kids go to college, but doesn't have the output in terms of turning them into productive players. McDonough's been phenomenal, especially to Penn State. You just had Curtis Jacobs go through, Devon Ellis is still here, go through that list. But I think it seems like a different kind. So it's very different than St. Francis. It's along the lines of the DeMathas and the Good Counsels and the, Gonzagas and the places that have had more success in terms of sustainability and all that. So you get guys that are well coached, pretty smart for the most part, pretty personable, and I go back to well coached again because they know what they're doing, and when they arrive here, maybe they're not ready to play physically, but they usually have an edge mentally on the guys that bring in. Nittany, of course, is kind of the poster child for that. So you've had a lot of success there, and Penn State's it's worth it to tap that well as much as possible. And I don't see these guys as borderline just because Penn State just taking them because they're going to McDonogh. I think these are legitimate prospects and maybe even better than we thought to begin with. Especially Finney. Finney's got some juice working for him here. Exner is a really good football player. I'm curious. I'm very curious to see how he develops because he's 217 pounds right now. Ran pretty well in Under Armour, really good athlete. But he's the rare receiver that's kind of built up before he gets to college. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I think those guys, they're different. I think it goes back to the coaching staff at McDonogh.
They're great kids too. Like that's also like all those guys, they're all quality guys, like just good families, care about a lot of those kind of things where, I'm not trying to hate on other programs, but like McDonogh gets Penn State kids or even Michigan kids or Notre Dame kind of kids. Like they attract the kind of prospects that Penn State, Michigan, Notre Dame, those kind of schools always go after. And I think it's when you're getting players who are well coached and all that throughout high school, and then they get into a college program that cares about a lot of the same things, that's how your hit rate is as high as it is.
What is your, I guess, early forecast for official visit season for these guys? Because I know Finney might be one of my favorite athletes to watch on film in this class because of all the things you guys have said. How does Penn State stack up in these things? And of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com to get all the information. But what's your read on how Penn State is positioned with these two guys?
I think they're right there with both. Finney's the interesting one because like Exner's recruitment goes back a couple years now. There's ties to Kenny Sanders. Like that's a relationship that's been brewing for a long time, many visits, all that. Like I feel safer about Exner than I would with Finney. And Finney really just kind of took off in December, January. I mean, I think Penn State was one of the first schools they offered, not the first, but I want to say maybe that was mid-December or early January, somewhere in that ballpark. And really his recruitment has exploded in a 5-month span. And usually when you get those kind of recruitments and you don't have the 6, 7, 8 visits to Penn State that we see with some other guys, that opens up the door for maybe some other schools to come in and impress. But, we were talking last week about, look at all the visits. And then, in the NIL world, maybe all the visits don't even matter anymore either. So I expect Penn State to be there with both of them. I feel safer about Exner right now than I do about Finney. But, I'd be shocked if Penn State's not one of the two schools that like these guys ultimately decide between.
Who else was at Under Armour that stood out to you from a performance perspective or from a conversation perspective?
Emmanuel Iheanacho is a stud, legit 6'6", 350. This is going to be, right now he's the top offensive lineman in the country for the 2026 class. And there was nothing that I saw the other day that would dispute that. So he's going to be the real deal. Great kid too. Another kind of remind me a lot of Olu in our conversation, just from would fit Penn State really well. I guess if that makes sense. Cares about a lot of the same things. I mean, look at the school he goes to. It's one of the best schools in that area. So that's not really a surprise. What was funny is, we were having a conversation there. Brian Doan was there with me, and he was kind of rattling off all the things he doesn't do well, which always kind of impressed me, for a young teenager, because you talk about majority of the conversations we have with these guys are all about, coaches love me. I can do this. I can do that. Yada, yada. Where, he's talking about how much growth he has still and, all the things he can get better at. So those kind of little things always stand out to me, especially when you're talking about a player as physically gifted as him. So look, he's going to be a stud. Everybody's going to be after him. Who knows how things will play out, but absolutely. As soon as you see him, it's hard not to be impressed. A couple other guys. Jabri Wallace-Coleman was there. Penn State's going to get him for an official visit, running back recruit. You can't take a whole lot from running backs, but it was more so just the conversation because he doesn't talk a whole lot. He kind of explained that North Carolina, Penn State are his top two right now. Michigan State is working to get an official visit. We'll see kind of what happens with the Imitsep player. But, I do think Penn State, as Sean was saying, we'll see what happens with the 3 running backs they have right now. But Penn State feels like they're going to have a real chance there if they want to land him. So that kind of stands out. I would say Travis Johnson, good-looking wide receiver, young prospect coming up from Virginia. Still pretty skinny. Certainly needs to add some size to him, but one-on-ones look very good. Testing numbers were impressive. Miles McAfee, by the way, this young man, very, very impressive. Going to Archbishop Spalding, another 2027 guy. He's going to play with Malik Washington this year. I'm going to have to try and get down to one of those games because he ended up winning MVP honors. And when you're a 2027 kid winning MVP honors at these kind of camps, that certainly grabs my attention. So listen, we could go all day on, players who I thought tested well or this and that. It was a good camp, maybe not quite the numbers we normally see, but that's what happens when Elite 11 is 150 miles away. The one thing I will say is I was going through wide receiver DB drills yesterday, and no disrespect to the quarterbacks that were there, but all the best quarterbacks in the region were at Elite 11. So it just kind of makes it harder to judge kind of some of the one-on-ones that we're watching there. Because a lot of underthrown balls, overthrown balls. And there are a lot of young kids. A couple of them will end up being solid quarterbacks, but there were also some guys there that aren't going to be on the Division I level.
So, Elite 11 in State College. We talked about this on Tuesday, but we'll get into some more of the conversations that we had and some of the things that we saw from the camp. Of course, you can see here on the intro Andrew Olesh, one of those players who was at the Elite 11 and not over at the Under Armour. Beckham Kritza, some of the top quarterbacks in the region. You mentioned Malik Washington. We got to see all of them up close. But Fitz, you got to talk to these guys afterwards, and some really great conversations you can read over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. What stands out to you of the things that you learned afterwards that aren't just the on-field testing stuff?
I talked to 3 quarterbacks afterward. Also talked to Andrew Olesh. The first one, I'd say Matt Zollers is a guy that Penn State continues to want to circle back around. I think it would probably be later in the cycle if it does happen. And after talking to him, I think he's going to Missouri. I think he's going to end up in Missouri. But we'll see what happens over the long run with that. Thought he looked good as well. Beckham Kritza, of course, the one that's committed there. Talked a little bit about him the other day. Probably better than I expected. Did not earn an Elite 11 finals invite. Not completely surprised by that. I think he's still a project, still a ways to go in that one. And that's a guy that we're going to be talking about for a long, long time in terms of how this cycle shook out. Malik Washington did get an invite. That's not really a surprise. I had him as my number 3 the other day. I think he's a really good prospect. I think that's one that, along with Kritza, they're going to go hand in hand in terms of we're going to talk about those guys for a long time with one another. So very interesting to see that. Diabell, we talked about the other day. Penn State right in the mix with that. Texas is also a big one. And there's a couple other schools. I know he just picked up Florida State this week as well. So like it's still a very busy recruitment. So Penn State, we'll see about getting him back, aiming for the Lash Bash there at the end of July. He came up at the end of July last year and was camping was camped the night before the Lash Bash and picked up his offer there. I think it's a really good relationship. I do think Penn State's in the mix. I'm curious to see what his decision timeline looks like, because leading into this, it was all, I want to commit before my season. And then we were just talking, and it was, hey, my decision timeline is very vague right now. I was going to decide before the season, but now that's out the window, is what he said to me, which I'm kind of surprised by that. So we'll see what happens. He's going to Texas next week and basically going to go head to head with Troy Hune, who's another Penn State target out in California. They're having their elite camp, and I would not be shocked if coming out of that camp, Texas leans on one of those guys to be their quarterback in the class of 2026. That's obviously going to have a trickle-down effect. Quarterback dominoes often do. But Bell's in there. I mentioned Andrew Olesh, the tight end. He's good. T. Frank, you were there. Yeah. You can confirm, right?
I don't want to say unbelievable, because we've seen it from Penn State commits. Luke Reynolds, similar. They're similar but different in terms of, I think Olesh is a little bit more of a polished receiver at this point. His routes were filthy, and his hands were just like, he was able to snag everything from full extension. Something you don't normally see a guy that looks like a receiver who's, massive and obviously is a tight end.
Right. Yeah, he was very good. Michigan and Alabama, both very much in that one. Penn State as well. He's got the official visit set to Penn State for June. But all those 3 schools, he's going to Florida as well. They're going to, this is not one that's, because he's in state, they're going to be able to push across the line easily. This is going to be a challenge. And I think Michigan has really made him think. And Alabama as well. He's wearing Alabama gloves the other day, but he also had Penn State gloves on him, from what I understand. So I think that this is one that you got to continue to sell what you do well. Penn State does tight ends really well. That's kind of the hamster running up here. It's like, in-state guy that you were on early, and at a position that you recruit and develop. I mean, that's a pretty good trio right there. It's gonna be a fight.
This is a stupid question, but I also think it's pertinent to the conversation. So again, a T. Frank special here. How important is this year from the Penn State offense? Because you can sell Andy Cole. Nicky's a breath of fresh air. He's a guy who's going to come in and create more explosive plays. He uses tight ends very well in his offense. And, I don't want to say features tight ends, because the receivers were kind of the dominant forces in that offense, but the tight ends did a lot of really cool stuff in his offense over at Kansas, and I think we project more of that in this offense. So Fitz, how much do they need a strong year to create an impression, not just for Diabell, but also, that long grind on Matt Zollers and trying to win the tide maybe with Olesh here to show, like, you don't want to go somewhere else because this offense is everything you want.
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to say it's too big because you look at the calendar, how this sets up. These guys are going to take 3 or 4 official visits in June and then probably decide in July. And the chances of getting them while uncommitted are greater than the chances of flipping them down the road, especially from a school like Alabama, Michigan, whatever it might be for some of these guys, Texas, if it's DFL. So you've got the opportunity to sell that vision, but there's only so much you can show them at this point. So you're kind of walking into it a little bit hamstrung, and that's Penn State's not alone in this situation. We see a ton of coordinator changes over throughout the year. So you have to sell the vision, and then you have to back it up. And I suffice to say that I don't think it has as much impact on the field as you would like it to have, because if you go out there and you're one of the top scoring offenses in the country, great. But it's going to take some time to get there, and it's going to take the vision before it takes the time to get there.
Ryan, how do you have any details you want to add into this conversation about the conversations and relationships and how you understand them for some of these offensive players?
His decision is going to be over. His decision is going to be done before we even get to that point. So that's a conversation more for 2026 guys, in my opinion. Sure, they can flip. They'll flip maybe a couple guys down the road, but there's 55 kids coming in for official visits here beginning next week, and just about all of them are going to be done before preseason camp even starts.
So that's it for our Elite 11 conversation. We do have something here in the chat, so we're gonna talk a little bit about the drama behind the scenes. If you're watching here on the show or you're listening on the podcast, Michael V came in hot on the live show yesterday, and then came back with the same conversation that Marques Hagans is a terrible coach and needs to be fired immediately, the worst coach hire in Penn State history under James Franklin. So we had some disagreements about the framing of the question, so that is why he says sorry for the delivery, because we had to have some conversations in the chat about how we like to talk here. He donated the channel because he wanted to have this conversation about Marques Hagans. Can we agree that Haggins should be on the hot seat? Let's say he doesn't get these wide receivers that are doing official visits, then what? Guys, is it realistic that Penn State goes 0 for, 11 with their official visit receivers? And I guess frame the conversation how you see it, please, around Marques Hagans and the job he's done so far. Fitz, if you want to go.
Based on expectations, I think there was a guy in the chat the other day that said if you don't get Quincy Porter, it's the biggest failure, which it's not. That's not how this works. I mean, you're looking at it, no offense to these guys, a dime a dozen position. You just got to find the right ones, develop the right ones. That they've had trouble with that in the last couple of years. Marques Hagans has been here just a little bit over a year, and yes, he needs to be better. Absolutely, recruiting, development, all that kind of stuff. This is not a situation where you see that overnight, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people would have liked to see that. So yes, I think he's going to come out of this OV season with a pretty good class. He's already got Lyric Samuel, who I'm very high on. I think that the industry is going to catch up to where On3 has him, or at least be close to where On3 has him. I think On3, I don't want to say overshot, but they got there first. So it'll be interesting to see where the rest of the class ends, or excuse me, where the rest of the services end up. So that's a good start for the class. But you're looking at Exenor, you're looking at Lex Cyrus, you're looking at 10 of these guys that are going to come in. You're not sure if you're going to have a wild card from out of the region that's going to join. So the fact that they have 11 of these guys that are pretty legitimate prospects here. I mean, this is not a situation where you're dragging a guy in for an official visit who everybody's looking at and saying, why is this guy coming in? So you've got a good base to work with. So he's going to have to recruit. He's going to have to do things better. He's going to have to get them where he needs to get. The results on May 23rd are not going to be what they look like on July 23rd. So I think that number one, that's a pile for, let's put that right there. Number two, the development is essentially a 2-year plan. And this is going to be year 2. This is going to be a situation where you need to see Caden Saunders. You need to see Liam Clifford. You need to see Trey Wallace. And that's tough because he has not stayed on the field. Amari Evans was mentioned here in the chat as well. So this is the big one. This is not about his recruiting in June. This is going to be his development in August, his development in September through December. That is going to be where his job status will lie. I don't want to put him on a hot seat yet, but I think it's worth putting a microscope on him if we're going to look at that. So I have an issue with, it didn't happen right away, so he's got to be out the door.
Right.
And the original framing of the question was the worst hire that Franklin's ever made. You can't say that with David Corley coming through here, Phil Galliano coming through here. There's been some bad hires,
Right.
that are Franklin's fault. Absolutely. Hagans, I think you can see that yet. We were having this conversation about Phil Trautwein a couple of years ago. Phil Trautwein is now one of the most sought after offensive line coaches in college football. Like there's levels to this, guys, and it's not all about the first time hot take. So that's where I'm at with that. I love the discussion. I love the discourse going back and forth. Just planting your flag and not moving off of it. It's tough to
There's not
have
much
that conversation.
We can't do a whole lot with that here on the show. And, that's, I think, where I started from. Ryan, I also want to have this conversation with you about the timeline. And Fitz laid it out as far as development. Year 2 is very important for Haggins and developing the guys that are currently on the roster. From a recruiting standpoint, what's the timeline for you of a guy proving, outside of immediately signing 5 stars and immediately, like, instant impact that everyone wants, the instant gratification, what's a timeline for other coaches, especially at a position where there are so many different body types, there are so many different styles, but at the same time, I think there's a general idea of who the top guys are and where the top guys go. There has been a consolidation of power at that position to a couple of top schools. One of them is in Penn State's conference, and it was in their division for the last couple of years. So what's a realistic timeline on when a guy can make an impact as a recruiter and you can start to see those dividends?
First full year is important. I would say second full year, so that would be 2026 for this cycle, or for Hagans. Like by then, I think you should have a pretty good firm feel, because remember, we're talking about recruiting cycles now that go 2.5, 3 years, even if you're a top player. So yeah, this is an important year coming up. He definitely needs to get some quality guys, and they have a lot of quality guys on planning official visits. So I think that's big. The one thing I'd also say is, like, looking back on that first year class, like, Peter Gonzalez ended up as a 4-star. I think people kind of forget about that a little bit.
And that was wasn't that also his first true commit, because Gonzalez committed in the summer after the official visit, and Haggins was the one who put him through the workouts during the summer. The relationship was there. I'm not saying that he went and found Peter Gonzalez, but if you look at the receivers that were brought in, Tysier Denmark and John Brown were a part of that conversation, but it felt like there was kind of a line of delineation where Marques Hagans really got a chance to take over at that point.
Right.
Is that fair?
To some degree. First of all, I forget who exactly committed first and all that kind of stuff, but like between Josiah Brown, Tysier, and Gonzalez, like they all were a 4-star at least one site. There are people there that respect them. Obviously, Josiah goes down with an ACL injury. A lot of the senior film we're looking to see, and on 3 bumped them down to an 89. Maybe it was an 88. Just because other guys were able to prove more, and they move up in the rankings. But I think, look, they all 3 of them have a lot to prove. So I'm not trying to say they're going to come in and be difference makers, but like if you're judging on that first class and not thinking it's up to standards, I personally thought it was a little bit better than I think maybe some fans are giving it credit to be. Like Tysier Denmark, he can. I don't know if he's going to come in and play right away because he's not going to be here till the summer. But like, this is a guy who, from an athletic perspective, is pretty special. Doesn't maybe have the long range speed, but certainly has all the explosion that you could ask for. Someone who could come in and maybe make a difference there as a second year kind of player. So let's see where this next class goes. To really answer your question, though, I mean, I feel like if you get to the end of the 2026 cycle and you're not seeing the kind of development you want, and sure, you're getting some solid 4-star guys, but maybe missing on too many, top regional guys that you really want. Okay, maybe then that's a realistic conversation. But like right now, I would not have him on the hot seat right now. But the development, to me, development's like the biggest thing. Like that's going to be really what kind of determines where we're at here come December.
Well,
more than recruiting, for sure.
That's what we got for the show. I think that was a great conversation. We'll be talking about defensive tackles again in 2 years. Just gonna guess at this point that we're gonna shift from receiver to defensive tackle and back and forth. Like it's just gonna be the same positions where there's these sore points on the Penn State.
Wait, we're gonna be talking about defensive tackle in like 4 weeks. Are you kidding me?
Right.
You see this defensive tackle board? It's so hard to read.
It's just like whatever the weakest point of the roster is going to be where we're going to be talking about it. And the fact that they've got 19 defensive tackles that are seniors that are all graduating. That's all I mean. So there's going to be a point on the roster where everyone's going to point to and say, that's the reason you can't win a national championship. That's the reason you're not beating the top schools. And this year, obviously, until they prove themselves, it's the wide receivers, it's the coach. So good conversation about all that stuff. Let's wrap up the show. Let's get out of here. So Fitz, what's coming up this weekend for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com so people can keep the conversation going about Penn State recruiting.
It's Memorial Day. It's a holiday weekend, so that's what's coming up this weekend. We're in that little dip right before just things get crazy. So camp is in 2 weeks. Official visits are in 2 weeks. You've got a lot of things to talk about on the Blue White Illustrated message board. Nate is firing off Penn State baseball updates as they come in. Penn State baseball, man.
They won yesterday.
They won yesterday. Upset number 1 Illinois. It was awesome to watch. To me, college baseball is really fun to me. My brother played D2, and I used to go up there to games and have a blast. Like it was like really fun. And then college baseball here is obviously on a different level, great facility at Medler. So you've got a lot of potential for fun. I met Gambino, the baseball coach, at signing day. He was great, like in terms of just like talking, and he brings a little bit more energy than the previous guy. So I'm curious to see how all this works, especially in the transfer portal era. There's a bunch of older guys on this team, and they're fun to watch. I remember Adam Cesari as a quarterback at Forest Hills coming to Penn State's football camp. He eventually went to Wake to play baseball, and now he's circled back around and had a phenomenal year. So I've had fun watching these guys for them to get where they got. Like they swept Maryland last weekend, and they beat the top seed. That's a heck of a run, especially when you're grading on a curve at Penn State, man. Like this is tough to win here.
Ryan, what do you got coming up this week?
Memorial Day, so not a ton, right? We're going to try and rest a little bit just because of what's coming here the next 4 or 5 weeks. But I'm going to catch up with Charles Power, I think, later today, kind of get his thoughts on some of those 2026 guys who made different movements in the rankings. Still sitting on a couple interviews from Under Armour that will trickle out here and there. We're starting to get some testing numbers and some more data back from Under Armour, so I'll work on maybe getting something up there. We'll see where things go. What's so funny, Sean? What do you want to say?
Somebody made a comment about adult softball. That's where I'm at right now.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So yeah, we're finishing up, wrapping up Under Armour. I'm gonna try and go through the wide receiver DB film, but I was doing it yesterday, and like as I said, the quarterbacks just weren't all the best quarterbacks.
Sorry, I took all your quarterbacks.
So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I can stress to people on the board, like, hey, watch the routes, don't pay attention to this. But then we put that out publicly, and people are like, what are we watching here? So I'm debating on whether I want to put that out there yet or not, just because a lot of it's just overthrown balls and guys just running around not catching anything basically. But we're wrapping up Under Armour, catch up with Charles, and other than that, try and enjoy my weekend. I'm gonna go out to Big 33 later today, catch up with some guys. I'm not going to the game though. Sorry guys, I'm not.
We got a lot of great stuff coming up here on the YouTube channel. In fact, we've got a new lineup coming up next week. More details about that we'll release both BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and on the show on Tuesday. So stay tuned for that. We same thing, just a different way of doing it that's going to bring more to you here in the live chat, more things that we can do here on the YouTube channel. So stay tuned for all of that information. Thanks to everybody who participated. Glad we all got to the same point today. Good conversation. We'll be back with more, including the highlights you saw today. You can check those out here on the YouTube channel. We'll be releasing those as their own standalone thing throughout the weekend. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Sean Fitz, Ryan Snyder. We'll talk to you later.